Welcome to Z's and Threes, part 3 of Where It All Went Wrong, Not Quite Yet. If you are new to the series, we are breaking down for each of the 29 teams that did not win the NBA title last season, the exact reason why, where it all went wrong. In part number 1, we talked about 9 teams that were doomed from the jump. Yeah, they may have window dressed it with 50 wins. They may have gone to the playoffs, but their seasons were doomed from the jump. They had no shot of winning the NBA title. You want to know why? Do you want to know which 9 teams? Go back and check out part 1 if you haven't yet. Part number 2, drop a med kit. These were teams whose seasons were lost due to injury. We hate to see it, but it has become a defining narrative across the NBA. Players that have gone down, that have been altering for seasons and maybe even years moving forward. We broke down 7 teams in Drop a Med Kit who lost their season due to injuries. This episode, part 3, 8 teams not quite there yet. There are 8 that I have determined are either on the precipice of or in the midst of a championship window, having the pieces necessary in place to winning a championship. Now, I have a 1-year-old son. I also have a wife. So when you say not quite yet or here not quite yet, I am well aware that that can mean any length of time. So keep that in mind as I break down each of these 8 teams. It could mean not quite yet, 5 to 7 years down the road, not quite yet, as they were knocking on the door this last season, and they are a team to watch as an NBA championship contender come this next season. Part 3, where it all went wrong, not quite yet, from Z's and Threes, presented by Contract Year. We start with the San Antonio Spurs, and what a year it was, full of highs and lows for the Alamo City and their fans. A mere 5 games into the season, the devastating news of head coach Greg Popovich, the man architect of 5 NBA titles during his time in San Antonio, suffers a stroke that takes him away from his position as head coach and ultimately has taken him away from that position moving forward. Deep vein thrombosis is a medical term that we've become far too familiar with across NBA circles, and that is exactly what ended the season for star Victor Wembanyama. But why this San Antonio Spurs team and where it all went wrong is not quite yet instead of drop a med kit, it is because the regard I have for Victor Wembanyama, and I think that everybody has for the young French star, and that he is a franchise player that you can build around to win a championship. So as I said in the open, the qualifier for this not quite yet, teams that are either in or on the precipice of a championship window, and the San Antonio Spurs with Victor Wembanyama in the fold will always have a chance, the way he is trending and what he has looked like as a player, to compete and win a title. Now add on top of that the addition of De'Aaron Fox into the long-term extension, back-to-back Rookies of the Year with Wembanyama and Steph Castle, and a chance to win it 3 in a row as the Spurs, by virtue of the lottery, come out with the number 2 pick and get Dylan Harper. The San Antonio Spurs team is young, they are stacked, and they most importantly have a championship franchise caliber player in Victor Wembanyama. Here's the first of these 8 that is definitely going to elicit some head scratching and some opinions. And I love to get into the conversation with y'all. The Atlanta Hawks, not quite yet. They could have easily fell into the doomed from the jump group for this past season, but count me as maybe one of the few believers in Trae Young. I think that he is one of the best orchestrators and point guards that the game has. And if you remember, this Atlanta Hawks team, led by Trae Young, did go to the Eastern Conference Finals back in 2020-21. So count me as a believer for Trae Young. I am also a huge believer in the Great Barrier Thief, Dyson Daniels. I think they have one of the brightest defensive stars who will continue to emerge as a two-way threat in this league. It was only Daniels' 3rd year in the NBA. He finishes as runner-up to Evan Mobley for Defensive Player of the Year. He's named All-NBA Defensive First Team, and he wins the Most Improved Player award. These Atlanta Hawks, at times last year, they showed that they can bang with the big teams in the the East. They won games against the Cavs. They won games against the Boston Celtics. But they also lost games to the Washington Wizards and a whole lot of other bad teams. That's how you end up with a 40-42 record. And you lose in the play-in and overtime to a Miami Heat team that their season was doomed from the jump. But count me as a believer in both Trae Young and Dyson Daniels, and for the moves that the Atlanta Hawks made in the offseason, adding Kristaps Porzingis, Zachary Rizache, another French bigman, the former overall #1 pick. If you remember, I know a lot of people slept on last year's draft, especially the two French big men in Rizache and Sarr that went 1-2, but Rizache had a low-key very good rookie season, and I am high on the French big man moving forward. So count me in on the Atlanta Hawks, Trae Young, Dyson Daniels and company as a team that this past year, they weren't there quite yet, but I like them moving forward. Here's another team that easily could have been quantified as doomed from the jump with the Portland Trailblazers. I don't think anybody anticipated the Trailblazers winning the NBA title this past season. But it isn't about how you start, it's all about how you finish. At one point, this team was 13-28, and I had Chauncey Billups firmly on the hot seat as a coach to go. I did not think that Billups would make it to the end of the regular season, especially after his team dropped a game 141-99 on their home floor against the Utah Jazz. Wow. But from January 18th on, this team down the stretch plays 23-18 ball. Why I'm so high on these Portland Trailblazers moving forward, enough so to put them in the not quite yet category. Yes, I do not think that this team is competing for a championship come next season, but I think that they have steadied the ship and they are moving forward with a trio of players that are very exciting. Danny Advia, Tamani Kamara, and Shaedon Sharpe. If you haven't watched those three play, you are missing out. And I started to say it as the season dwindled down. I think that the Portland Trailblazers, out of all the West teams that did not make the playoffs this previous season, are the one team that I'm firmly willing to say this is a playoff caliber team. Now, they may have two of the worst contracts in the NBA in Drew Holiday and Jeremy Grant, but those also may be two tradable pieces. They do go out and make somewhat of a head-scratching move, but given their history, signing Damian Lillard, a player that will not play all of next season, so you somewhat have conflicting timelines between that young core. Throw Donovan Clingan, the big man from UConn, who had a great rookie season, in there as well, along with that elder statesman group, but maybe you get Damian Lillard back and he can show the ropes to these young players, and look out for the Portland Trailblazers because their season went by the wayside last year and it was doomed from the jump. That's where it went wrong from the get-go, but they salvaged it. I think Billups stays the head coach and they are a team to watch come next season. Okay, so we're done with teams that are just potential and they haven't showed that yet. Let's start to talk about the teams that built upon having championship pieces and having the ingredients to be successful in the playoffs when it all matters. And there we have to start with the Detroit Pistons. If you're a fan of Z's and Threes and you watch the show across the course of the season, I'm not a Detroit Pistons fan, but I was a fan of what they were doing from the get-go. They make a coaching change. They get the right man in the job to lead them out of their 14-68 season under Monty Williams. He's out. JB Bickerstaff leaves Cleveland. He comes in. What does this team do? Well, they proceed to win 44 games and go to the playoffs for the first time since 2018-19. And what do there? They play a hell of a series against the New York Knicks, one in which you change a couple plays here or there, and the Detroit Pistons could have easily found themselves on to the second round. But still, it was a massively successful season in Motown for the Pistons. And the biggest reason why, the evolution of their star, Cade Cunningham. I think that repeatedly, Cade Cunningham showed that he is a franchise player that you can build a championship team around. So it might have all gone wrong in losing out to the experience of the New York Knicks, and specifically Jalen Brunson, Karl Anthony Towns. But Cade Cunningham has shown that there is life back in Motown for the Detroit Pistons and Detroit basketball. This is an exciting franchise to watch moving forward. And while they weren't there quite yet last season, excited to see where they go for this coming season. The Houston Rockets, another team and another franchise that showed immense growth last season, emerging from the NBA cellar, from the post-Mike D'Antoni, James Harden, Chris Paul years to finally be in the playoff picture. First year under head coach Ime Udoka after his dismissal in Boston brings that hard-nosed, gritty mentality to his team. They go 41-41. But last year, they start to open some eyes with a deep and talented roster, both with young pieces and experienced pieces. At one point, I picked the Houston Rockets to finish first in the Western Conference in the regular season. Now, I was very wrong on that one. The Thunder end up going on a historic run. But I value experience for teams, and Fred VanVleet, Dylan Brooks at the time, Sam Adams, I felt that they brought a necessary element of professionalism and veteran experience that could help take the Rockets into that next tier. And that's exactly where the Rockets went, as they finished second, surprisingly to a lot of people, in an uber competitive Western Conference. A big reason outside of that veteran experience, the play of their talented Turkish big man Alperen Şengün. If you're not familiar with the name, you're not familiar with the game, go check out the young Turkish star. He does it in every facet, and he earned his first All-Star nod. Had a case, I felt, for All-NBA, but one of the biggest reasons why I think people should be high on the Houston Rockets. But for this last season, it was not quite yet, and the reason being his counterpart in young stars, Jalen Green. Both players, if you remember, were paid on their rookie extensions prior to the start of the season. So the Rockets obviously enough faith to see what they had in Green. And that is exactly what was on the table in that 7-game series against the Golden State Warriors. Now, a very tough opponent for an inexperienced, non-playoff contending team together. Jalen Green was supposed to be the guy to go out and get buckets. And when he did, the Rockets won. But when he didn't, well, that's the reason why, as the 2 seed in the West, they saw their season end probably around earlier than it should have at the hands of the experienced Warriors, and why Jalen Green is in Phoenix. Kevin Durant is now suiting up in a Rockets uniform. So not quite there yet this past season, but you swap KD, one of the game's best and most efficient scorers, for Jalen Green. The Houston Rockets, that is a team that can easily contend in the Western Conference and for an NBA title. The Cleveland Cavaliers. What to make of the season for the Cleveland Cavaliers, and where did it all go wrong? Throughout the entirety of the regular season, they were competing back and forth with the Oklahoma City Thunder as to who would have the best record. And I think a lot of people were out there asking, hey, which, if not both of these teams, are for real? Are they frauds, or is this going to be the NBA Finals preview in those matchups that we saw, just the two across the course of the regular season? Now, as we saw it play out, Oklahoma City ended up being legitimate. Cleveland ended up being fraudulent. At one point, they were on pace to win 70 games. Darius Garland, I would wager to say, there is not a player whose reputation suffered more in the playoffs throughout his injuries and his defensive lackingness, I will call it. But the player to me that it falls most squarely on the shoulders of, the one that won Defensive Player of the Year, and the player that will be the guide for the Cavs moving forward if they want to move out of the not quite yet and into that championship level tier, it is Evan Mobley. Is Mobley good enough to be a championship caliber player, a dominant player that can take over in playoff games? We know what Donovan Mitchell can do, and Donovan Mitchell, it seems, is fully bought into Cleveland and where Cleveland is trying to go. But they need Evan Mobley to make that ascendancy as an offensive force, as he is a defensive force, if Cleveland wants to go from the not quite yet disappointing season end at the hands of the Indiana Pacers once again, and into that we are competing for a championship category. The Minnesota Timberwolves, where did it all go wrong last year? Well, that is very easy to pinpoint. You go down to the late game execution in Game 4 of the Western Conference Finals, in which they lose by 2 points to the Oklahoma City Thunder. It would have tied the series up at 2-2. Instead, it moves 3-1 in favor of the Thunder. The Thunder go back to Oklahoma City and close it out. The Minnesota Timberwolves, so interesting, everything that has been going on. I think that 2 years back, that was a really special team, a dynamic team with Karl Anthony Towns. He's traded away. The Wolves, they are a victim of the second apron and the salary cap realities of this new CBA. In comes Dante DiVincenzo and Julius Randle. And it felt like for the majority of the early parts of the season, those were two pieces that were reluctant to fit in and did not necessarily want to be in Minnesota. I don't know. Can you blame them to go from the bright lights of Madison Square Garden and playing for the Knicks to playing for the Timberwolves, a franchise that has perennially been in the bottom portion of the NBA? But the Minnesota Timberwolves get the buy-in. They have a special player clearly in Anthony Edwards, that championship franchise caliber player to build around. Back-to-back Western Conference Finals. We're talking about the Minnesota Timberwolves here. But in both of those Western Conference Finals, they lose in 5. Now, what do you chalk that up to? Is it not having a bona fide second option to complement Anthony Edwards? Well, 2 seasons ago against Dallas, they had Karl Anthony Towns. Last season, they had Julius Randle. Are those two guys clearly number 2s in the league? Is Anthony Edwards clearly a number 1 option that is good enough to take his team all the way through, to put his team on his shoulders and say, guys, I will take us there if you can just give me a little bit of help? Just 24 years old, back-to-back All-NBA second teams. And I think there's probably 29 other teams that would take their chances with Anthony Edwards being their lead star to try to take them to a title. But look no further than those Dallas Mavericks to how quickly the complexion of things can change in the NBA landscape. With their ownership situation solidified, Alex Rodriguez and Mark Lore fully taking over, how does this franchise look moving forward? Will cutting cost and maintaining a friendly budget to the team be the priority, or will it be building around Anthony Edwards to try to win that elusive NBA championship? And our 8th and final team of Part 3, where it all went wrong, not quite yet, the New York Knicks. And yes, this probably pains Knicks fans that they are not in the final group. Part 4, you'll have to wait and see. But the Knicks just weren't quite there yet. And the proof is in the pudding. They lose in the conference finals. They lose for the second straight year to the Indiana Pacers. But on top of all of that, they fire the head coach that leads them there in Tom Thibodeau. The most successful coach for the Knicks in over 2 decades is out. And then they have a circus of a hiring process constantly told no by the Chicago Bulls, probably most insultingly, and Billy Donovan, to where they finally settle on hiring the fired Mike Brown of the Sacramento Kings. But the New York Knicks, they have progressed. And they have what I believe is a championship franchise caliber player in Jalen Brunson. He has shown repeatedly that he can play in the bright lights of New York City, play with the high expectations, and deliver come playoff time. But what the New York Knicks don't have is that dynamic piece. And I'm not saying a bona fide second fiddle. I think that some of their other parts, starters 2 through 5, give them enough. But who is that dynamic guy that could come off the bench potentially and be that X factor in a playoff series? That guy that's good enough to help you win one game that leads to a series win instead of a series loss. That is what the New York Knicks are missing. And that is why they were not quite there yet last year. They just did not look a class of the caliber of the Indiana Pacers, a Pacers team that got by with depth. If you remember, the Knicks did not do it with depth. That is a big reason why Thibodeau was shown the exit. His reluctance, or maybe in his mind, not having any viable options or pieces that he could count on to bring in off of the bench. But in Karl Anthony Towns and Jalen Brunson, Mikal Bridges, the New York Knicks have the pieces that they need to compete, especially in what is now a wide open Eastern Conference this next year. But last year, the Knicks and their rabid, dying for a championship fan base, well, they were there, but not quite yet. There you have it. 8 teams whose seasons fell just short because they were not quite ready yet. For various reasons. Some very early on in their championship window. Some are firmly in it. And the onus will fall upon them come next season to be in the mix, climbing that championship mountain to try to hoist the Larry O'Brien trophy. 5 teams left to break down where it all went wrong. We dealt with part 1, the doomed from the jumps. Part 2, the teams who lost their season due to injuries. And then these, the teams that weren't quite there yet. What does part 4 have in store? Well, 5 teams who maybe if one thing went their way, they could have found themselves NBA champs. So one more part left in where it all went wrong. If you've missed parts 1 and 2, go back, check those out. If you like what you see here at Z's and Threes, please do like, subscribe, share with a friend. As always, we appreciate y'all rocking with us. Stay tuned. Part 4, where it all went wrong, coming next Friday to conclude the series. Peace.